announcements about Ladies' Day because tonight is lesson 3 of the book of Judges, and our title is Women to the Rescue. And so we're going to talk about two very prominent ladies, not prominent in the Old Testament per se, but prominent in this story. And that, of course, is two ladies. Who are they? Deborah and Jael. That's exactly right. And many of you have heard this story before, but just for those of you who are new or haven't heard the story before, which is probably very few of you, but when Brittany and I started dating, she told me her favorite female character from the Bible was Jael. And I thought, well, that's odd. I mean, her only claim to fame is she killed a guy with a tent peg. Like, that's a little scary. So I don't have tents or tent pegs in my house. Just, I sleep a little sounder at night. But lesson 3. And so here in lesson 3, we're going to be talking about the chapter 4. And so let's go right ahead and jump into this new oppression. We've seen in the past with the Othniel and with Ehud that the Israelites were unfaithful. They turned towards God and asked for Him to help them from their oppressors. God comes. He frees them from those oppressors. They have peace for quite some time. They have peace for about 80 years. But after that peace, they go back into idolatry. They go back into being unfaithful to God. And so God puts them back into oppression, this time by a different nation. And so let's pick back up at chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, about these new oppressors in the land of Israel. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, and He had cried out for help, for they had 900 chariots of iron, and He oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. And so here we're told that Ehud is no longer there. In chapter 3, we're talked about Ehud and about how he was able to overthrow the oppressor, King Eglon, by forcing a dagger into his stomach. Then they're able to kill his army, basically. They have decades of peace, but all of a sudden the Israelites forget who God is. They forget the fact that He is sovereign. They shouldn't be going out and worshiping false idols. They shouldn't be worshiping Baal and Asherah. And so they become to be oppressed again. For how long are they oppressed? 20 years. By who? What's the king's name? Jabin, right? Interesting thing. In Hebrew, there is no J sound. And so, which is weird because there's so many J names we're used to. Jerusalem, Jesus, Jabin, Jael. And so normally when it's a J sound, it's a Y. It's a Y, like this was Jabin. And so Jael is like Yael. And so Jerusalem is like Jerusalem. That Jesus is Jesus, which is interesting. Why? Side bit, there's a group of people who say that unless when you pray, you use the name Jehovah, He won't hear your prayers unless you use His name. Which is funny because the Hebrews didn't even have a J sound in their alphabet. And so it can't even happen. So, anyway, side note, I apologize. Anyways, so they do not keep the ordinances, and so there's a void there, and they begin to be oppressed. And so this Canaanite nation is starting to oppress the people of Israel. Now, the people of Canaan were a great political power before the conquest of Joshua. They become subdued. In fact, we read in Joshua chapter 11, I believe, that Joshua actually subdues Jabin of Hazor. Now, this is decades later. And so, is this the same Jabin? You got a 50-50 chance. Probably not, because Jabin actually means the discerner or the knowing one. This is probably a dynastic name. Does anybody know of a different dynastic name used by other peoples, maybe even other times, for someone who was a leader of their people? Caesar, right? Yeah, Caesar's not their name, right? But it was a dynastic name of the ruling class, the leader of the Roman people. There was another one. What was that? Herod. That's right. Herod was used. That's why sometimes when you're reading the book of Acts in the New Testament, it's so confusing because Herod's been killed, but you're reading about Herod. Well, Herod named his 4 sons Herod, basically, which was kind of the name of ruler. There's another famous one in history. Pharaoh. That's exactly right. And so Pharaoh, the bearing one. And so, so this was probably a dynastic name of the one who was leading the people of the land of Canaan. But the Canaanites had gained power in the north. They had gained influence. Hazor was one of the largest cities in the Palestinian area, and it was in the middle between Mesopotamia and the land of Egypt. And why would that be an important place? What do you think existed between Mesopotamia and the great powers like Assyria and the Hittite Empire and Egypt? You guys know it. You're all whispering. Go ahead, say it. Anybody? Oh, come on, guys. You're so quiet tonight. Trade routes, right? Trade routes. You got to get things from one place to the other, right? And for Rob and Jason, it's location, location, location. I mean, you're smack dab in the middle. Anybody that wants to go to Egypt has got to go right through your town. And when you're in a good spot, it becomes really easy to gain a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of influence really fast. And so you see these Canaanites in this area of Hazor start to gain a lot of money, a lot of power, a lot of influence, and they start taking back some of the control that was there before the Israelites moved in under the power of Joshua and the other leaders of the Israelite nation. And so this made it a very important and influential city. And so the commander of the army, Sisera, he lived several miles south of the capital of Hazor in a place called Harosheth Hagoyim, which literally means the woodlands of the nation. And this is probably in the region known as Galilee in the New Testament. And so this is Jesus' stomping grounds, where Jesus does a lot of his ministry in the Gospels, is in this place that we're talking about, where the Canaanites currently have control. And the Canaanites were a great military power. In fact, one of the things that the Israelites say when they come back, thinking about our sermon from this past Sunday night, one of the things the Israelites say, they come back, they say, these people are giants and they're warriors. I mean, we're farmers. We're bricklayers. These guys are warriors from their youth. And so the Canaanites were a warring people. And so when you think about like Athens, which has more of this air of being artistic and culture and refined, and then name some other Greek city-state that would be more like the Canaanites. Sparta, right? And so you've got a culture that is defined on warfare. And so it's very easy for these Canaanites to oppress these Israelites because they're men of war. And the fact that the Israelites have left God, and they have 900 iron chariots. And these would have been state-of-the-art weaponry at the time. At a time where most of the soldiers of Israel would have maybe had a couple of, farm utensils, sharpened pieces of iron. They were untrained. The phalanx was not used at all in Israel in warfare. You basically just had guys out there in line charging each other. And you have somebody on horseback. The Israelites didn't have a cavalry either this time. And so you have these chariots who could literally just mow down anybody that came in their way. And so the Israelites were no match for these Canaanites. And so they fled and lived in the hill country. Any questions or comments so far on the first three verses? By the Canaanites or the oppression that they had in these verses? No? Well, let's get to the players. Let's get to the major players. This is a map up here, the map we've been referencing for our last few classes. As you can see there, number 4 is going to be Deborah. And so if you can kind of see that right towards the upper area, Deborah is actually going to be further south, right there by the Dead Sea. But you see number 4 up there, the Canaanites, that's where they're going to be inflicting the most damage upon the Israelites, up there around the Sea of Galilee. And so as we go on, this is a replica of an iron chariot that would have been used during this time frame by the Canaanites. It doesn't look super imposing. It doesn't look super dangerous. But if you're standing there with no armor, with a rake, and this thing's going 25 miles an hour with swords and spears and arrows, it gets pretty intimidating pretty fast. So let's talk about Deborah and Barak in verses 4 through 11. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at the time. And she used to sit underneath the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. And she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go, gather your men on Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon, and with his chariots and with his troops, and I will give him into your hand. And Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called out to Zebulun and Naphtali and Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite was separated from the Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and he pitched his tent far away as the oak of Zaanannim, which is near Kadesh. And so here we're introduced to Deborah. And so Deborah was a prophetess and a judge, and her name means bee. She's one of 3 prophetesses that are mentioned in the Old Testament, along with Miriam, the sister of Moses, in Exodus 15:20. Also, Huda is mentioned in 2 Kings 22:14, just in that one place. She's never mentioned again. In the New Testament, Anna in Luke 2:35, Anna is mentioned as a prophetess. And then after the church is established, you have the 4 daughters of Philip who are called prophetesses in Acts chapter 21, verses 8 through 9. These are all mentioned as prophetesses. And so Deborah would have been someone who was not a political leader, but was more like a civil leader, kind of like Samuel. Samuel had a few military conquests as he was a judge and kind of helped lead the people of Israel, but really wasn't known as a military commander, and Deborah was not either. Also, it is interesting to see just how far the sphere of influence that Deborah had. She gives judgment not in Jerusalem or some city this time. She's not at Shiloh, close to the tabernacle. She's underneath a palm date tree in the middle of pretty much nowhere. And so it's interesting to see just how much influence she had. We know people went to her for judgments, for she had insight and wisdom, but we just don't know what the sphere of influence she had at that time. But she knew Barak, and Barak knew of her and wanted her to go with him when the battle was going to take place. And so we're introduced to Barak, who's a warrior. His name means lightning. Now, we don't know how much warfare he had with the Canaanites. Now, we're going to see on a map here in a moment, but the amount of distance between where Barak is from and where Deborah is from is a long distance, especially in the ancient world where there is no form of automotive transportation, where you've basically got to walk there or ride on a mule. And so it's interesting the fact that they two know each other. And so we're not told about any of the military conquests before this battle. So was Barak a guerrilla fighter? I mean, well, what type of warrior was he? The Bible just doesn't tell us. And so, but Barak is summoned by Deborah, and she has asked him to go and to fight. Then we have Deborah tells Barak to take 10,000 soldiers to go to Mount Tabor, which is located in Galilee. And he is to wait for his army, take them to the mountains, and then wait for God to draw Sisera upon him, and they're going to go out there. Now, where this is interesting because you have Mount Tabor, which is located across the plain of Jezreel, which is close to Megiddo. And so what you have here is the Battle of Armageddon, where the forces of the Canaanites are located in Megiddo, and the ones are on Mount Tabor. Now, it's interesting because, well, we'll talk about that in a minute, but Barak is afraid to go up and fight against Sisera. I mean, this is a warring nation. The Canaanites, they have 900 chariots of iron. He's like, there's no way we can stand up even this number. There's just no way we can do it. And Deborah's like, take your men, go. And he says, I'll go with you. Now, why did he want Deborah to go? She doesn't fight. She's not a military leader. Does he think that since she's a prophet that God's hand will be with him if she's there? Is he worried that maybe God will send a different revelation before the battle comes? We're just not told. He just asked for Deborah to go, and of course she goes. She says, but because you didn't have faith, the glory will be given to a woman. Now, who's the woman the glory of the battle is given to? Jael, right? It's not even her herself, but it's Jael. And so here you have a palm date tree in the Middle East. And so this would have been the tree that Deborah, not the tree, but this is the tree, the species of tree that Deborah would have been underneath. And so think about some woman in the ancient Near East and that type of clothing and garb sitting underneath a palm date tree, executing justice, if you will, having court. And so here on this map you can see where the Dead Sea is in the south. Okay, where that red line is, the bottom, that is where Deborah is. She's in between Ramah and she's between Bethel. And you see at the very top line is Kadesh. Now, who's from there? Anybody remember where he's from? Who's from that place? Barak, that's right. And so look how far Barak has to go to get this information from Deborah. That's a long way, especially in a time and place where there is no automotive transportation. And he has to go through territory that is unsafe, where other nations have already gone into. In fact, he's crossing territory that the Canaanites have already conquered. And so he actually has to go through Canaanite land to get to Deborah and then to get back to raise his army. So it's even a treacherous job just to get to Deborah and to get back safely. Now, if you can see that little mountain place right there that's close to the Sea of Galilee near the top, that is Mount Tabor. That is where the forces are going to be concentrated, and that's where the fighting is going to take place. And so here we have the victory that comes in verses 12 through 16. Any questions on verses 4 through 11? No? Okay, let's read verses 12 through 16. When Sisera was told that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out all of his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. And Deborah said to Barak, "Up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you?" And so Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord routed Sisera and all of his chariots and all of his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. And Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword, and not a man was left. And so normally with these chariots, you'd have at least 2 men. If we've got 900 chariots of iron, we're talking about 2,000 men. They probably had some infantry soldiers with them, we're not sure, but it's at least 2,000 soldiers that are going to be there with the battle, but not a single one of them lives. And so here we have Sisera attacks. And so he's got trained chariots of iron, which we've already said is going to be more than the Israelites can withstand, even with the amount of men that they have. I mean, this is just, think about going up against, the German Panzer Division, with a bunch of infantry soldiers. Infantry soldiers are good, but if you got panzers coming with you with the best type of armor that can be there, have the best armor, they're the fastest tanks, the most firepower, and the Germans are super well trained. You want to be that infantry soldier? I don't. And so how do these people overthrow such a well-trained army and chariots of iron? When the time comes, Barak may have been scared beforehand, but he's not scared of him when the moment comes. And so God delivers a way. Now, we don't know exactly what happens. And so that's why I have bring on the rain with a question mark. And the reason that's there is because in the Jezreel Valley, it is super prone to flooding. One of the only ways that the chariots could have been taken out in warfare with hand-to-hand combat is if the chariots get stuck in the mud. And so some have supposed, and I think it's a good idea, and I kind of lean this way myself, that God delivered them by way of like a rainstorm, a flash flood, if you will, which allowed the chariots to get stuck in the mud. Once again, this is not what the text says. This is just what people have supposed, why they met on this plain and these chariots were able to not do the damage that they're supposed to do. It also makes sense, too, because when Sisera flees, what does he do? He's on foot. Why would you get out of your chariot? You're in a chariot with horses. You're fighting a bunch of guys who are walking, who just came down from a mountainside. Why would you get off your chariot and run? Unless somehow the chariot was deposed, whether it be in muddy water or a field that had been, we've all been stuck in a muddy place before and your ankles feel like they're just concrete and cement. And so perhaps this is what happened. Like I said, we don't know for sure, but it seems that the valley soil was softened in chapter 5, verses 4 through 5, and verses 20 through 21 in the Song of Deborah. It kind of alludes to this fact, although without stating it completely. And so probably this is why it couldn't get away. And there's great irony here because the Canaanite god is Baal, who, in all the depictions we have of Baal, or Baal, some people say, he has a lightning bolt in his hand. Anybody remember what Barak means? Lightning. And so who's bringing the lightning? And so here you have this showdown between the Canaanite god Baal and Barak. And so who's going to win? And interesting too, Baal is the god of rain. I mean, he's your chief god of rain. They lose the battle. Why? Potentially why? Because it rains. I mean, imagine this. I mean, your whole culture worships one God. And they worship other gods. They have a main God. He's the God of rain. You go into battle. The only way you can lose is if there's just an unseasonal downpour that causes the place to get muddy and you can't fight with your chariots. And it rains. So not only do you lose the battle, but you feel like your God who you worship and pray to, who's the God of rain, has, left you high and dry. But the opposite, low and wet, which is not a good thing in this case. And so, who brings on the rain? And so the Lord overwhelms Sisera and his forces, and Barak pursues them all the way to where they came from and kills each and every soldier that is left. Any questions or comments so far on verses 12 through 16, or the battle itself?
Lightning and iron don't exactly mix either.
That's true. If you're talking about a place where it's a plain and it's low level and there's because lightning's attracted to two things, right? Well, I know of two things. One of those is, water. Okay, three things. Water, metal, and the highest object, right? And so you've got these guys in these chariots on a flat plain, and it's raining. They're in metal chariots of iron, and they're taller than the other things around them, right? And so, if there's a downpour, a lightning storm, it's a pretty bad place to be if you're in an iron chariot. So good comment there, Danny. Any other questions or comments? You guys are quiet. I'm going to start passing out candy for class or something. Everybody's blood sugar going. All right, here's some pictures. Here's the Sea of Galilee. Of course, from the Gospels, we know that Jesus focused his ministry heavily around the Sea of Galilee. He goes to Tiberias there, that you see right there on the Sea of Galilee several times. And Capernaum, if you can see that, the north side of the Sea of Galilee, that's basically where Jesus and his disciples live during the 3 years of his ministry when they're not traveling. So you can kind of see this is the area where Jesus spent most of his time. But here you can see that red dot, that's Mount Tabor. And so Jesus was in this area quite a bit during his earthly ministry. Here is a modern day picture of Mount Tabor. You can still go there. If you look at the very top of that mountain, there is a massive church that sits on top of that mountain. It's called the Mount of Transfiguration, the Church of Transfiguration. That is because the Catholic Church thought that this was where Jesus had the Transfiguration in Matthew 17. They built a massive church that is there. You can go to it today. It's beautiful on the inside. There's only a problem. That's not where the Transfiguration took place. They got it wrong. It's a beautiful church, though, and it's the Church of Transfiguration. People would say, well, how do you know? Well, because in the first century, there was a Roman garrison stationed on top of the mountain, and probably not where Jesus had the Transfiguration. And so here is a picture of the battle that takes place. Here you can kind of see the colors. Now you may say, Isaac, what's going on here? Okay, there's three colors. The colors that are blue, these are the colors that Deborah praises in chapter 5 for coming to the aid and fighting against the Canaanites. The red ones are the ones that Deborah throws out kind of some what we call, not hatred, but she throws a little shade at them, if you know what I mean, for not coming to the defense of the nation. And then the ones in the gray, anybody want to take a guess what the gray territories or gray tribes are? What's that? Well, neutral, but they're not mentioned at all. And so Deborah doesn't mention these tribes at all in a good way or a bad way, which is interesting because if you look at this, Deborah is right there on the cusp of Judah. She's in Ephraim, but she's close to Judah, but she never mentions them or Simeon. And so here, what you can see here is this yellow line. Okay, this is between Ramah and Bethel. So what do you think this line symbolizes? They're at the very bottom. Deborah, that's exactly right. So Deborah was judging between Bethel and, can y'all see that? Those words kind of hard to see, or can y'all see that? Somewhat. That's where Deborah is. And so you can see the trek where Deborah made going up to where Mount Tabor is, because that's where she goes with Barak with the troops before the army happens. What you can see here, this purple line, that is the line that the army of the Canaanites under Sisera, they go from Harosheth Hagoyim, and they go down to Megiddo right there at the Kushan River. They gather their forces, they go up to Tabor, and that's where the battle takes place. The light green line is the path that they took whenever the soldiers were fleeing, after they had been beaten, and the Israelites chased them down and then start killing off each and every one before they can get back home. And so any questions so far on verses 12 through 16? Or the maps that we saw? No? Okay. All right. Who's the name of the king of Canaan? Jabin. Where's their capital city? Hazor. Good, good. Who's the guy that's the general of the Canaanite army? Sisera, right? Who's the general of the Israelite army? Barak. Okay. Just making sure you guys are awake. I didn't know. You can quiet over there. Right? Verses 17 through 22. But Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was a place between Jabin, the king of Hazor, peace in the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me. Do not be afraid." And so he turned aside to her and to her tent, and she covered him with a rug. And he said to her, "Please, give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." And she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And he said to her, "Stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down to the ground while he was laying fast asleep from the weariness, and so he died. And behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man with whom you are seeking." So he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with a tent peg through his temple. And so here we get to verses 17 through 22, and we're told about the Kenites. And this might not seem like a big deal, but it's actually really important to the story. Now, the Kenites are the descendants of Hobab. Now, there is some confusion here who Hobab was to Moses. Some translations say he was his father-in-law. Some translations say he was his... Anybody got a different translation you're reading tonight? What's that? Brother-in-law. That's right. Some translations say father-in-law. Some say brother-in-law. Maybe thinking, well, how do you confuse that? I mean, I've got both, and I can tell the difference, right? Well, because Hebrew is not written with vowels, it's written with consonants. And so vowels were added later. Well, there's a problem. The consonants for father-in-law and brother-in-law are the exact same. And so some say father-in-law, some say brother-in-law. I think maybe this is brother-in-law because, man, if this is father-in-law, this has been some time since Moses. I mean, it's been a while since Moses. And so Moses had to rob the cradle, if this guy says father-in-law. Big time. And so I think maybe this is brother-in-law, but that's just my opinion. It doesn't matter. Anyways, and so Heber means smith. Got any Smiths here tonight? Got a few? All right. Brother Smith, your surname, what does it normally come from? Like, what does it mean? Yeah, like an occupation. Most people have last name Smith. Somewhere in the line, your ancestor was a smith. Blacksmith, coppersmith, silversmith, goldsmith, smith of some kind. And that's what this word means. Heber, it means smith. So potentially he was a blacksmith. Why is this guy who is a nomad, who is a descendant of Moses' family, some way, some shape or way, why is he friendly with both the Canaanites and the Israelites? Well, probably because he was a blacksmith. If you've got iron chariots and iron weaponry, who do you need? You need a blacksmith. If you're the Israelites and you've got iron tools you're using in the fields, what do you need? Blacksmith. If somebody comes out today and say, Donald Trump's an idiot, what do they just do if they're a business person or an artist? They lost half the country. Somebody comes out and says, Donald Trump's the best president ever lived. What did they just do? They lost half the country. It's bad for business. right? Dolly Parton was giving an interview the other day, and you could tell the person was asking her about, what do you think about Trump? Are y'all friends? She wouldn't say anything. She wouldn't say anything, and she just said, and I think she said something like, Democrats buy CDs too, or something like that. I forgot what she said. But she was basically saying, I'm not playing that game, right? And so it seems like maybe Haber was, Dolly Parton 3,000 years ago, minus the wig and the makeup and the jewelry, right? He's playing both sides of the fence. And so, in fact, Kenite means blacksmith. Haber actually means ally. And so he's an ally. And so as Sisera is fleeing, he knows where the tent of Haber, the ally, the Kenite is, because he has peace with the king of the Canaanites. And so he must have been a pretty important guy to have a peace with the ruling king of that area. And so he goes there, he seeks for shelter. And so it's interesting because most Kenites lived in Judah. Anybody remember that picture I saw you? How far Deborah had to go to this point? Okay, the Kenites were even way further than that, southern Judah. And so this guy had evidently left at some point, gone up to the northern region of the state of Israel, and was making his living. And so think of him as like a modern-day Switzerland. He's cool with anybody as long as they bring money. And so he was responsible for probably maintaining the tools of the Israelites and the chariots of the Canaanites. And so it makes sense as to why he's liked by both sides. Regardless of whatever he was a descendant of Moses, and he was in league to some extent with the nation that Moses has said that the Israelites were to wipe out and exterminate completely. And so Moses said, drive them all out. And he's up there, lining his pockets with their money. And so probably not a very good guy. And so we have Sisera. He flees to a perceived safety. And Lee Corso voice, right? Not so fast. And so he goes in and he goes to the tent of Jael, which under ancient Near Eastern rules, you're talking about a time when really if you weren't somebody's close kin or husband, you really even shouldn't be talking to a woman. And so he has to go to her tent. And she lets him go into her tent. And so this would have violated the hospitality laws of the ancient Near East. And so he should have went to Heber's tent, the head of the household. And even if Heber wasn't there, he should not have accepted an invitation into a woman's tent. And so this would have alerted Jael that something was amiss. And then Sisera asked him request, which again is a no-no in the ancient Near East. If you go into someone's house, you don't ask them to get you stuff. I mean, that's just not how it works. And so Sisera is a general of a conquering army. He goes into a woman's tent. He's making requests. And so this is an alert to Jael that something is amiss. Something is not right. And so this is too much for Jael. Now, it's interesting because Jael did not hold the sympathetic feelings towards the Canaanites that her husband did. She was a worshiper of Yahweh, and she would not compromise with the Canaanites. And some have suggested from these things in ancient Near Eastern law that Jael may have thought that she was in danger of being sexually violated. In chapter 5, Deborah talks about how men who are victors in war oftentimes take female captives for their own sexual pleasure. And so Jael does not know how the battle has gone on. All of a sudden, this general comes in. He's in her tent. He's making requests. And so some scholars have suggested that Jael may have been fearing for her safety and whether or not that Sisera was going to violate her sexually. And so he asks for water. What does he give her instead? What does she give him, instead? She gives him milk, right? It's probably not the milk we're thinking of. It's probably what the Middle Easterns call libin today, which is kind of a mixture between a yogurt and a curded milk. And so he's asking for water. She gives him milk, which is going to be kind of warm on his stomach. It's going to help him go to sleep. And so, which is interesting because Jael means mountain goat. And so you have Deborah. What does Deborah mean? B. What does Jael mean? Mountain goat. And what do they use goats for? Give milk. What does Jael give him? Milk. See the irony there? It's kind of interesting. And so she gives her guest some milk. He goes to sleep. And so Jael kills Sisera. Was this a justifiable killing? Yes, Miss Kathy.
Didn't she actually, in verse 18, go out and invite him in?
Yeah, and that's what I said. Even if she would have invited him to her tent, he should have said no. That's a no-no. And so she realizes that something is amiss. for him to accept an invitation into her tent, which may even have some of those sexual connotations that some of the scholars have pointed out, that maybe she's thinking that might be the case. And so some even said that she enticed him into her tent. I'm not saying I wouldn't go that far, but he's afraid for his life and he's running, and she can tell something is not. She can tell something's up. Something's not kosher, pun intended. Great question. Was this a justifiable killing? All right. How was it a justifiable killing?
Well, she wasn't there.
There-
For one, and for two, he shouldn't have been in there.
Yeah, she was. There's a good. I kind of tend with some scholars think that she's probably afraid for her safety. Right. There's another one. What did Moses say you're supposed to do with the Canaanites? Destroy them. She's got a Canaanite general in her tent, and she's a worshiper of Yahweh. What is she going to do? Her husband may want to make some money off the Canaanites. She's just going to do what God said. And so this mountain goat is fearsome, and she kills Sisera. I almost said she kills Jael. That no, not work. And so Barak finally shows up on the scene, and she's like, "Hey, I got the guy you've been looking for. Right? I finished the job for you." And so then this is what an ancient tent peg would have looked like. And so you can kind of see somebody driving the tent in their hands. In the nomadic society of the Kenites, the woman's job was to take down and put up the tents. And so she would have known where it was at, and she would have known how to drive a tent peg, right? She'd known what she was doing. Some people are like, how could a woman drive in a tent peg? Anybody done any fencing, like cattle farm? Anybody ever done one like in the springtime? You ain't mended fences in a while, and it takes like 4 whacks of the hammer to like find the steeple, but you do it all day, and then you can like 2 shots, you're done. Like you're just like, feel like a man, you know what I'm saying? Like 3 shots, okay. If you work out, Tom, you can do it in 2, okay. Anyways, so Jael knows how to swing a hammer, right? She knows how to work a tent peg. And so here's a modern view of what a tent peg would look like. There you can kind of see the height there on somebody's hand. The conclusion of the matter in verses 23 through 24. Let's go ahead and finish that out. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel, and the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. And so the Canaanites are defeated. Jabin is deposed. Israel rejoices and has peace for about 40 years. Will they remain faithful? Tune in next week, right? Before we close and dismiss, what are our takeaways? God hears his people. He heard his people crying for help then, and he hears our cries for help today. Number 2, God does not overlook women. There were things that women could not do in the Old Testament. There were offices that women could not hold under the Old Law in the Old Testament, but that did not mean that God did not think that they were worthy of important things. And so here you have the bee, Deborah, and the mountain goat, Jael, providing the people of Israel once again with a land of milk and honey. Let me repeat that. Deborah the bee and Jael the mountain goat lead the people back to milk and honey. Y'all got that? Okay. That's good stuff right there, okay? I just want to make sure y'all appreciate that. Okay? Today, going back to number 2, today we should not be spending all of our time thinking about the 2 or 3 things that women cannot do in the New Testament church, or the 2 or 3 offices they cannot hold. We should spend more time thinking about the literally hundreds of things that women can do in the Lord's church and make a vast difference for the Lord and his kingdom and Christians today. So many times we get caught up on why can't women do this, and think about how can we empower our women to make a difference? Because there are so many women in the Old Testament that made a difference. Focus on the positive things, not those things that are perceived to be negatives. Number 3, God will provide a way. There's no reason why the Israelites should have won that battle, but God provided a way. Maybe it was rain, maybe it was lightning, maybe it was something else. But the Bible says God provided a way, and he did. And the 4th thing is, be ready regardless of what you have to use. And so even if you're like Jael and all you've got is a tent peg and a hammer, if you're willing to be used by God, he will let you use things that other people look at and scoff at to do great things in his kingdom. Those are our 4 things. Any questions or comments before we close in prayer? No? All right. Well, let's go ahead and let's close the prayer, and looking forward to seeing each and every one of you on Sunday. Dear Lord, we're so thankful for all the many blessings you've given us. We're so thankful for your word. We're so thankful for the examples we have to look to, like Deborah and Barak and Jael, individuals who were up against insurmountable odds, but through their faith and trust in you and their reliance on your will and your word, got them through a time where they were being oppressed by a larger, stronger group of people. Dear Heavenly Father, please help us to emulate that type of faith and resilience in our own life, as each and every one of us have giants that we're facing, that have problems that we're facing. And Lord, we know that you've told us in your word that you will provide a way of escape in any and every source of temptation or hard time, and help us as individuals to look for those ways of escape, that we can be faithful and true to you no matter what the situation is. Please watch over us and help us to be faithful each and every day. As in your son's name we pray. Amen.